Hey, welcome to DA Tool Brief 0003. At 7:42 on a Monday morning, the electronic health record system at a regional hospital stops responding. The hospital is already carrying a heavy load. The emergency department has 31 patients in treatment spaces, 8 more waiting, and 5 admitted patients still waiting for inpatient beds. Morning medication rounds are underway. 6 operating rooms are scheduled. The laboratory is processing the first major specimen wave of the day. Pharmacy is verifying new orders. 2 patients are expected to transfer in from smaller facilities before noon. At first, the outage looks limited. A few nurses report frozen screens. Registration cannot open a new encounter. A physician in the emergency department can still see an older printed patient summary, so the team assumes the interruption will clear quickly. Then more functions fail. Medication administration records become unavailable. New orders do not transmit to pharmacy. Laboratory labels will not print. Radiology can perform studies, but results are no longer returning through the normal workflow. Bed management loses the current placement view. The discharge team cannot finalize medication lists or instructions. Information technology begins isolating the failure. They cannot give the hospital a reliable restoration time. Their first estimate is 2 hours. 10 minutes later, they withdraw it. The operating objective is legitimate and direct. Continue safe patient care, preserve critical clinical information, and prevent the outage from spreading into avoidable patient harm. The hospital has downtime procedures. Paper order forms are stored on each unit. Printed patient summaries are available for some admitted patients. Pharmacy has a manual verification line. The laboratory can accept handwritten requisitions. The incident command structure can prioritize essential services and reduce non-essential workload. The system can continue, but it cannot continue normally. A nursing supervisor recommends activating the formal downtime plan, limiting manual workflows to approved forms, pausing elective activity that depends on unavailable information, and creating one controlled channel for medication, laboratory admission, and discharge decisions. Several department leaders resist. The surgical schedule is already full. The emergency department is boarding patients. Canceling or slowing work will create a second backlog. Staff know their patients. The outage may end before a full downtime transition is complete. One leader says what everyone wants to believe. Keep moving. Use whatever forms you have until the system comes back. That decision feels practical. It avoids a hospital-wide slowdown. It gives each department flexibility. It allows leaders to show that the organization can work through disruption without overreacting. Within 40 minutes, the hospital is using 7 different paper formats. Some physicians write orders on approved downtime forms. Others use blank progress notes. One unit accepts verbal medication orders and writes them on a local worksheet. The emergency department begins tracking patients on a whiteboard. The operating rooms use printed schedules that no longer reflect too late changes. Laboratory specimens arrive with inconsistent identifiers. Pharmacy receives orders by fax, telephone, secure message, and hand delivery. Work continues. Control does not. A high-risk medication order reaches pharmacy twice through 2 different channels. A pharmacist catches the duplication before dispensing. 2 blood specimens must be recollected because the handwritten labels do not match the laboratory's downtime standard. A patient transferred from the emergency department arrives on the floor before the receiving nurse has the full paper record. Discharge is slow because no one can confirm which medication list is authoritative. When the electronic system returns 4 hours later, the operational problem is not over. The hospital now has hundreds of paper actions that must be reconciled, validated, entered, and checked against the restored record. Staff members who spent the morning improvising must now recover the information while continuing patient care. The system outage created the interference. The hospital's uncontrolled workaround created the second emergency. Think about what actually happened. The employees did not lack commitment. They kept caring for patients under difficult conditions. Department leaders were not wrong to protect throughput. The emergency department could not simply stop receiving people. Inpatient nurses could not wait for the electronic system before responding to pain, changes in condition, or time-sensitive medication needs. The operating rooms could not treat every technical interruption as an automatic reason to abandon the entire schedule. The hospital also did not fail because it used paper. Manual processes are not automatically unsafe. A prepared downtime process can preserve continuity when normal systems are unavailable. The failure came from confusing continued activity with controlled operations. Leadership saw two bad options: stop the hospital until the system returned, or let every department find its own way to keep moving. That was not the real choice. The hospital needed to reduce the outage's interference enough for essential care to continue while controlling the damage created by the temporary response. The objective was safe patient care. Maintaining the normal schedule was only one operating method. Protecting the objective did not require pretending the hospital still had normal information access, normal verification, normal communication, or normal capacity. Go back through the signals. The outage affected medication records, order transmission, laboratory labeling, imaging results, patient placement, and discharge instructions. Those were not separate inconveniences. Together, they showed that the hospital had lost a shared operating picture. Information technology could not provide a stable restoration time. That removed the assumption that staff only needed to improvise for a few minutes. The hospital had approved downtime resources. That meant a controlled containment option already existed. The nursing supervisor identified the need for one communication structure, one set of approved forms, and limits on activity that depended on unavailable information. That was not a recommendation to stop caring for patients. It was a recommendation to narrow the temporary operation enough to keep it safe. Leadership continued because a formal downtime transition carried visible costs. Elective work might be delayed. Department leaders would have to explain why some activity stopped. The emergency department backlog could grow, and the organization would have to admit that the current operating model was no longer available. Improvisation felt faster. It also distributed responsibility so widely that no one appeared to be the person slowing the hospital down. But distributed improvisation created hidden costs. Every local form created another recovery burden. Every additional communication channel increased the chance of duplication. Every undocumented handoff weakened the restored record. Every exception increased the amount of information that had to be reconstructed after the system returned. The decision tension was not speed versus caution. It was uncontrolled continuity versus controlled stabilization. The hospital needed to keep moving, but it did not need every function to keep moving at the same pace, through the same channels, or under the same assumptions. A stronger response would have protected essential clinical care first. It would have narrowed manual medication ordering to an approved path. It would have required consistent patient identifiers for laboratory work. It would have established how imaging results would be communicated. It would have delayed work that could not be completed responsibly without the electronic record. It would have assigned ownership for every paper action that would later require reconciliation. That response would not have fixed the technology. It would have contained the operational effect of the failure. And that is the part leaders often miss. When a problem becomes active, they keep studying the root cause while the interference spreads, or they apply a workaround so broadly that the fix damages the surrounding system. The first response is too slow. The second response is too loose. The right question is narrower. What is the minimum effective action that reduces the interference enough for the objective to continue without creating a larger failure? What was the problem actually preventing in this hospital? Which functions had to continue? Which functions only felt urgent because the schedule was already full? What could the temporary response damage if it spread without limits? Who would own the paper decisions after the electronic system returned? At what point would a controlled downtime process no longer be enough? The direct action tool for that condition is tactical resolution. Tactical resolution is a containment strategy used when an active problem is interfering with the objective and must be disrupted or stabilized. enough for the operation to continue without creating unnecessary second and third order damage. The use line is direct. Stabilize the interference without creating a bigger system problem. Tactical resolution begins after the operating condition has changed. The problem is active. It is no longer a warning that can be avoided through strategic evasion. It is no longer a legitimate issue that can be captured and returned to later through identify and postpone. The interference is happening now. Work is slowing. Information is degrading. Quality is becoming less reliable. Customers, patients, residents, employees, or production commitments are beginning to feel the effect. The leader has to act, but action does not mean solving everything. Tactical resolution is not the final correction. It is not broad repair. It is not permission to bypass every control that creates friction. It is a disciplined move that reduces the immediate effect of the problem, protects the objective, limits collateral damage, and creates a point where the leader checks whether the temporary action is still working. In the hospital, the electronic system failure required technical restoration. That work belonged to information technology, vendors, security teams, and system owners. The operating leader had a different responsibility: keep essential care functioning while the technical problem was being addressed. That required containment, one approved paper process instead of 7 local versions, one medication order channel instead of 4, clear limits on which procedures and discharges could continue, defined communication for laboratory and imaging results, named ownership for paper record recovery, a reassessment point based on patient load, staff capacity, information reliability, and the duration of the outage. Those decisions stabilize the interference. They do not pretend the system has been repaired. Tactical resolution is also different from critical intervention. Critical intervention fits when stabilization is not enough, and the problem must be acted on decisively where it sits, because delay increases significant damage. If the hospital could no longer identify patients reliably, verify critical medications, communicate urgent results, or maintain minimum safety controls, a limited downtime process would no longer be sufficient. The organization might need to stop affected services, divert patients, transfer care, or take stronger emergency action. Tactical resolution fits, while a controlled containment move can still preserve the objective. The recognition signals are practical. The problem is already affecting execution. The team cannot responsibly postpone it. The full correction is not available inside the current decision window. A temporary action can reduce the interference. That action can create downstream damage if it is too broad, poorly communicated, or left in place too long. Cleanup will remain after the immediate pressure is contained. That recognition level is where I want to keep this tool brief. For now, hold on to the operating principle. A temporary fix still requires operating discipline. Now move the same condition into manufacturing. A plant manager is responsible for completing a customer-critical production run before a scheduled freight pickup. The line is producing a precision pump assembly used in commercial refrigeration systems. The customer has already depleted most of its safety stock, and a missed shipment will begin affecting its own production schedule. 2 hours into the run, the automated vision system begins rejecting assemblies at more than 4 times the normal rate. The line is still operating. The machine is placing components correctly. Initial checks show that many rejected assemblies appear acceptable. Maintenance believes a lighting controller inside the inspection station is failing intermittently, but the replacement will not arrive until the next morning. The problem is active. Accepted output is falling. The inspection queue is growing. Operators are beginning to stack rejected units beside the line. The issue cannot be postponed because the current verification method is interfering with release. But bypassing inspection entirely would create a different exposure. The plant could meet the shipment window and send defective assemblies into a customer's production process. One supervisor recommends shutting down the entire line until the vision system is repaired. Another recommends overriding every rejection and letting final inspection catch any defects later. Both responses appear defensible. The first protects quality by stopping uncertain production. The second protects the shipment by keeping volume moving. Neither response is narrow enough. The plant has trained inspectors, mechanical gauges, approved defect criteria, and traceability by lot. A controlled temporary process could route only the vision system rejects through a manual verification station, while accepted units continue through the normal path. Production could be reduced to a rate the manual station can support. The affected lot could remain segregated. Quality could define the temporary limit and review the output before release. That move would not repair the vision system. It would stabilize the interference. What is the exact point where the failed inspection system is disrupting the objective? What collateral risk appears if the plant overrides too many controls? How much production can the temporary process support before the queue becomes another failure? Who owns the inspection records and the return to normal control after the replacement arrives? If the manual verification cannot reliably detect the required defects, tactical resolution no longer fits. The plant would need a stronger response. Now move it into public sector operations. A county emergency communications center is handling a severe thunderstorm that has produced downed trees, flooded roads, power failures, and a sharp increase in 911 calls. The computer-aided dispatch system remains online, but the mapping interface begins lagging by several minutes. New calls enter the queue. Dispatchers can see the caller information, but unit locations and route recommendations are no longer updating reliably. The objective is to receive emergency calls, identify the actual need, assign the right response, and maintain control of police, fire, and medical resources across the county. The interference is immediate. Dispatchers begin confirming locations by radio. Supervisors place printed map books at each position. Field units report road closures that are not appearing in the system. A dispatcher recommends transmitting every call directly to the closest available unit and allowing responders to sort priority in the field. That could reduce the dispatch queue. It could also send units into flooded routes, duplicate assignments, weaken coverage, and create radio congestion. Another supervisor recommends holding all lower priority calls until the mapping system is restored. That may protect emergency resources, but it could allow hazards and service needs to accumulate without a controlled review. A tactical resolution would narrow the temporary operating model. Priority calls receive immediate manual location, verification, and radio confirmation. Known road closures are maintained on one shared board. A designated position tracks unit status independently of the delayed map. Lower priority calls remain in a visible queue with defined review intervals rather than disappearing into an indefinite hold. Field supervisors receive the temporary communication rule and report changes through one channel. The center establishes a reassessment point based on call volume, mapping delay, radio traffic, and the ability to maintain reliable unit accountability. The system problem remains if the interference is controlled enough for emergency response to continue. What would happen if every dispatcher created a different workaround? What could the fix damage if radio traffic becomes overloaded? Which temporary actions must be documented for later call record reconciliation? At what point would the center lose enough location or unit control that containment was no longer responsible? Shift the pattern into hospitality. A hotel operations director is managing a sold-out property on the evening of a major convention. More than 100 guests are expected to arrive within a 2-hour window. Housekeeping has released most rooms. The front desk is fully staffed. The property management system has current reservations, room status, identification notes, payment records, and digital key controls. Then the system loses connectivity to the company's central reservation platform. Existing local records remain visible, but new changes are no longer syncing. Mobile keys stop issuing. Several guests arrive with reservation confirmations that do not appear in the local view. The call center continues modifying bookings without knowing the property is operating from stale data. The hotel cannot postpone the issue. The arrival line is growing. Guests need rooms. The front desk is losing confidence in which records are current. A manager proposes checking in anyone who can show a confirmation email and assigning any room marked clean. That will move the line. It may also create duplicate room assignments, payment disputes, identity control failures, and promises the hotel cannot support. Closing the desk until connectivity returns is not workable either. The hotel has a narrower option. It can separate guests whose reservations are fully verified in the local system from those requiring manual confirmation. It can issue physical keys under a controlled log. It can freeze non-essential room moves. It can reserve a small room block until conflicting reservations are reconciled. One manager can maintain contact with the call center through a single channel. Every manual check-in can be marked for later system reconciliation. The hotel may accept slower throughput. It does not have to accept uncontrolled assignment. What part of the outage is actively interfering with the arrival objective? Which guest services must continue and which changes should pause? What could a broad manual override damage? Who will reconcile keys, payments, room assignments, and loyalty records when the connection returns? The temporary process is successful only if it stabilizes arrivals without creating a larger guest recovery problem after the system comes back. The industry's changed. The decision pattern did not. The hospital lost the electronic structure supporting medication, laboratory, patient movement, and documentation. The plant lost reliable automated inspection during a customer-critical run. The Emergency Communications Center lost dependable mapping during a storm surge. The hotel lost live reservation synchronization during peak arrival. In each situation, the problem was active and the objective still had to move. The full correction was not immediately available. Doing nothing allowed the interference to grow. Acting too broadly created new risk. The leader needed a minimum effective stabilization move, clear limits, communication, cleanup ownership, and a point to reassess. The tool is the point, the situation is the proof. Tactical resolution does not mean finding the fastest workaround and calling the operation stable. A workaround that spreads without limits can become more damaging than the original problem. It also does not mean holding endless meetings while the active issue continues consuming capacity, trust, quality, or time. The leader has to recognize the operating window. The problem can no longer wait. The system does not yet require the most aggressive response. A controlled containment move is still available. That window can close. A manual process may become overloaded. Temporary controls may begin failing. The collateral impact may exceed the benefit. New information may show that the problem is more severe than first understood. Reassessment is what prevents tactical resolution from becoming permanent improvisation. Before we close, look at one active disruption already interfering with your operation. What objective is it slowing, blocking, damaging, or destabilizing? What happens if you leave it alone for another hour, another shift, or another day? What temporary action is available right now? What could that action damage if you apply it too broadly? Where does the temporary action stop? Who owns the cleanup after the immediate pressure falls? What evidence would tell you that stabilization is no longer enough? The accountability question is direct. Are you controlling the interference or are you allowing the team to improvise? Because defining a narrow response would force you to choose what matters most. Tactical resolution is controlled stabilization. It protects the objective without pretending the root problem has been solved. It uses enough force to reduce the interference and enough discipline to keep the temporary fix from becoming the next failure. This has been DA Tool Brief 0003, Tactical Resolution. Across the next direct action briefings, we will place this tool inside different operating environments and examine what leaders must recognize when an active problem can no longer be postponed. When you are ready to move from recognizing active interference to building the complete stabilization, collateral risk, cleanup, communication, and reassessment structure, the full tactical resolution method is taught inside the direct action training. Until then, keep one question in front of you. What active disruption are you still allowing to spread because the only responses you are considering are doing nothing or changing everything?